Off. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's great to see you all. I'd like to start by acknowledging country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, waters, and culture, and also to acknowledge that we're on Gadigal land today, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Tonight's session is Costa Rica, a decarbonisation lab for the world. And in a minute, I'm going to hand over to Abby Thomas. But just to give you a little bit of an introduction to Abby, Abby is Head of Sustainability and Collaborative Design Partner at SBS, combining her passion for both sustainability and innovation. She recently spent 3 months in Costa Rica, researching how this small middle-income country became a global sustainability leader and what Australia can learn from this. Abby has more than 20 years' experience in digital strategy, transformation, sustainability, innovation and product development, having led teams at SBS, Commonwealth Bank, Deloitte, ABC and in the UK government. She was Vice Chair of the Australian Design Centre and President of not-for-profit One Step Walks, which connected local communities with refugee communities, which sounds so interesting. We've got a fantastic session tonight. So, Abby, I think we'd like to welcome you and hand over to you. And then after you've spoken, we'll have some questions if anybody, and a discussion if people want that as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for having me on. It's great to be part of this group and see a few familiar faces and some others that I recognise the names but I haven't necessarily seen for a while. So nice to see you all. I'd like to echo the acknowledgement of country as well. I think Wongal country is where I am tonight, but broader in the Gadigal country as well. And very much wanting to pay respect to the storytelling, the care of country, and the real decades, thousands of years of sustainability approach that we owe to our First Nations brothers and sisters. So it's great to be here. And I'm really excited to talk to you about Costa Rica. I feel like since I've spent 3 months there and come back and keep sort of dropping it into every conversation I can, a lot of people are like, Costa Rica, where? Like, people don't necessarily have a great level of awareness here in Australia. It's not particularly close and we don't have ongoing connections. So I was really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you today and just share what I found out when I went there recently. So I'm going to just share a deck that I have. See if we can get this working.
You got it warmed up?
Can you all see that? Fantastic. Okay, so Costa Rica is famous for some of these things: sloths, beaches, volcanoes, and coffee. I certainly brought back a lot of coffee with me. Although, interestingly, I think Sydney coffee is better because they're just not really used to having flat whites and cappuccinos. It's very much kind of strong black coffee, a dash of milk. So I was kind of craving Sydney coffee. I think a lot of Costa Rican coffee gets exported to here anyway. But it was great to see where it's actually grown. But there is a lot more to the story, as some of you may know. So the whole country is pretty much run on renewable energy. It's around 99%, kind of fluctuates a little bit year to year, but really impressive when here we're thinking about individual organizations or households trying to get to 100%, but the whole country is just there already and has been for many years. There's an amazing story around reforestation. Their land got very degraded over years of agriculture, and they've reforested it back up to 60% forest cover, which is amazing. When you're there, you really get the sense there's just such dense forest around. And because of that, they host 5% of the world's biodiversity. Doesn't sound like a huge amount, but I think the land mass is 0.03%, so very disproportionate and amazing bird life, wildlife, as well as all the plants. And they top quite a lot of different global indices around sustainability. So I took the opportunity to take 3 months off work and with my oldest friend from school, spend the time in Costa Rica. And it was part holiday, part adventure, but also this real desire to kind of find out how Costa Rica had become so successful, leading the world in sustainability. And so I had the opportunity to speak to about 40 or 50 different Costa Rican experts in a whole lot of different fields, transport, waste, energy, agriculture, health, and really try and get under the hood of how they have really achieved this amazing success. We've got about 5 million people there, so similar size to New South Wales, but really topping some of the charts globally. So it was pretty incredible. There have been some really big, bold government decisions. So they invested in renewable energy early, back in the 70s. And it was actually more because of energy security, because they didn't have fossil fuels, they didn't have those natural resources, which I think has been a blessing in disguise for them. So they really invested in hydro and geothermal because they've got all the volcanoes. But they made the decision to pay for conservation and to bring citizens into the effort. I'll go into that in a bit more in a bit. And they got really early into sustainable tourism. So now we kind of feel like ecotourism, sustainable tourism is something that you can go and explore anywhere. But back in the 90s, when it was quite new, they really leaned into it and thought, this is an area we can really differentiate ourselves. And they have this amazing decarbonisation plan, ambition to be the decarbonisation lab for the world. So they have a national decarbonisation plan that they're kind of following sector by sector, which is incredible to see that kind of joined up government. Some of you may know they abolished the army in 1948, one of only a handful of countries in the world that have done this. And they literally swapped the soldiers for trees. They put that money into the environment and education. And it was pretty incredible to see a country that had had 75 years of peace and stability, and because of the education had got to a level of relative equality. And the conservation efforts it was like a virtuous circle then leading to this thriving sustainable tourism market sector. But interestingly, you kind of think things are top down, but actually there was a lot of bottom up, real passionate community leaders that I met, people who have invested time and effort and energy in their own particular area of expertise or influence to really try and make things better. So this was just a handful of the people that I met, but really lobbying for conservation, trying to bring the community with them, understanding that you can't just plant a lot of trees, but ignore all of the locals who are dependent on their livelihoods there. But the one kind of almost magical factor that I really saw there was this pura vida. So that's the kind of national saying, pura vida, pure life. Before I went, I thought, oh, is this just a kind of tourism phrase that they say, like, oh, pura vida, everyone goes around saying this, but they really do. And it kind of embodies this connection to nature, connection to the natural world, and also a kind of pragmatic acceptance of this is the way life is, pura vida. You know, it'll be pouring with rain and you're slogging up a mountain, but it's like, pura vida, this is life, like, be in it. And that really connected then to this knowledge and pride in the local birds, the wildlife, a real sense of this is our landscape and we know it and we love it and we want to share it. They talked about being born green, this generational flip, because hunting and poaching was quite common until very recently. But now you're seeing the children of those hunters actually becoming tour guides and really knowing the local forests and national parks and being able to share it with tourists who are coming. And I think the other thing that's part of this pura vida is the pragmatism and resilience. They do have volcanoes, active volcanoes. They've got tropical cyclones. So they've really had to adapt their buildings, their way of living, their kind of response in the face of disasters. And I think there's quite a lot we can learn from that as we face our own climate disasters here. So that's a geothermal pool, just showing the power of the bubbling mud. And that's, as I said, a big source of renewable energy, but hydro as well. So they're now at 99%. But interestingly, I guess I kind of had assumed, well, once you're at 100%, you're good. But obviously, energy demand keeps growing. It's not static. And so they're really now struggling to build more. Obviously, geothermal and hydro are really massive investments, but build more wind farms and actually start rolling out solar, which they hadn't really done at all to meet that growing demand. The conservation was incredible. So obviously national parks, which we know about here as well, but also the largest network of biological corridors in the world. We've got a bit of an echo there. I keep going.
I think
We're good.
Yeah,
got it.
all
Done,
good.
done.
Yeah. And then this government policy to pay citizens to plant trees or preserve existing forests. So if you were a private landowner, you could get paid an annual fee to just not cut down the trees that you already had, or conversely to plant additional ones. So that was a real way of bringing the citizens along on the journey to really lead to that reforestation. There is still pressure from developers, and at the moment the president is a populist, a kind of Trump lookalike, who is there is pressure from developers basically to start building on some of those protected lands. So again, things are not static, but a lot of the Costa Ricans I met were very confident that their legislation and their constitution would really protect the land that they had. Tourism, so sustainable tourism makes up about 10% of GDP, and a whole lot of different ways you can explore that. They have adventure tourism, zip lining and whitewater rafting and all of that, but a lot is really just in nature, and people really come and have that experience that they can't get in other places. Again, under pressure though, with mass tourism, you've got cruise ships coming, luxury hotels, but are actually putting pressure on the environment. And then the buildings were interesting because it's such a tropical climate. There's this real indoor-outdoor living, which I guess we talk about here, but these were houses with no walls in quite a lot of cases because they just didn't need them. So immediately you kind of have very energy efficient places because they're using the natural breezes. But thinking about emissions, you still have embedded emissions in some of the materials they're using. So then some challenges. I guess before I went, I was a bit idealistic. I just thought Costa Rica's perfect. They've got everything right. And obviously it's not quite like that. And also, it's gained some of these successes organically, as I said, the top down and the bottom up. And so it's not just a systematic rollout across all sectors. So agriculture was one of the areas with real challenges, a lot of pesticide and fertilizer use. You can see here kind of third and sixth highest in the world, which was pretty shocking. And there's not much organic farming. So you had pockets of it, like this permaculture farm that I visited. But in general, a lot of the big crops like bananas and pineapples are using a lot of the pesticides. Transport, I was also quite surprised to see not much take up of EVs, not great public transport. And because they've switched to 100% renewable energy, transport and now has bumped up to the top as one of the biggest sources of emissions. And a lot of that is from private cars. And it's a bit of a circular, vicious circle where the public transport's not great, so then people drive, and then there's no investment in public transport. And waste was interesting because I guess in Australia we're so used to having all of consistent recycling bins everywhere. It was quite hilarious. I went around taking pictures of bins wherever I went, and there were so many different types, but this was my favorite. It was just recyclable, not recyclable, and therefore there's quite low recycling rates because people don't really know what to do. But at the same time, they're not generating as much waste as we do in Australia, so the actual waste prevention side is quite good. And things like national parks, you're not allowed to take in any food and certainly not take in plastic bottles, and they check your bags before you go in. So that was really great to see because you weren't getting all of the rubbish in the national parks. Bugs. So black soldier fly larvae was pretty incredible. The guy who was running this startup said he reckons humans will be eating them within 5 to 7 years. They're not that appealing. However, they're so sustainable. It's incredible. Like they grow really fast. They basically create high quality protein. They use like a tiny amount of land, water, energy to do exactly the same as you would for animal protein. And I guess because people are a little bit grossed out by it, it's at the moment it's just for animal feed. But they're just a few regulations away from this being human food. So that was kind of exciting to see. It's also a bit of a circular economy model with using banana peel waste to feed these larvae, and so kind of getting rid of the waste that way. This was really cool. Some researchers at a university in San Jose were using mushrooms to create bricks, and they were just running experiment after experiment. They had mushrooms that were growing into the shape of kind of leather. And they were like, oh, this feels a bit like leather, so maybe we'll use this as a leather substitute. They had ones that were being used as, could be used as packaging or biodegradable plate. But the bricks were just beautiful because they had these amazing kind of orange red colors. And they were saying, yeah, we bake them in high temperature ovens. And yeah, I mean, they were like, yeah, it might not be great if it rains too much, but in some of the drier parts of the country. And I know there's experiments going on in Australia as well around these kind of biomaterials. But what I really loved there was just the real excitement and enthusiasm and kind of unpredictability of, we kind of don't know what these mushrooms are going to do next. There's so many different types and different potential uses. This woman was incredible. Bernarda Morales Marin. She is one of the indigenous groups, the Bribri people who live near the Caribbean coast but inland. And she had basically kind of single-handedly, but bringing the women of the village with her, created this sustainable tourism venture cooperative where tourists would come in and see cacao and how it was grown and help sort of volunteer with the harvesting and bring money into the community. But she was saying the Bribri people are a matrilineal society, so really led by the women, but they'd kind of forgotten this heritage over the last couple of generations because of colonialism and I guess more Western ways of doing things. And it was only through a conversation with her great-grandmother that she was told about this kind of heritage and culture that she had. And so she rallied the women of the village around her. She was only 23 at the time. And all of the community was in a bit of crisis because they grew cacao, but there were failures with the cacao crop. So the men were going out of the community to work on banana plantations with high pesticide use. And they all came back with problems, cancers, sterility, a lot of really serious problems. And they were losing their culture, losing the language. And so she kind of came up with this idea to bring people back to the village, bring people in and share the culture and actually build up the language again as well. So by the time, this is now several decades later, she's now got half the village employed in this cooperatives, all led by women. Incredible. She's revitalizing the language and the culture. And it was just a really beautiful story. So thinking about takeaways for Australia, I felt like there were so many similarities in a way, like the natural beauty, the unique wildlife. We have these amazing national parks. I think there's huge potential to drive sustainable tourism here. I mean, obviously you've got the big hurdle of people having to fly here, which is not particularly sustainable. But once they're here, really showcasing that beautiful nature that we have. It was interesting in Costa Rica, there was really a sense of so many national parks, and tourists were kind of going from one to the other because they each had something really unique and interesting to offer, and it was a bit of a tourist trail. I don't think we have that here, and I think there's huge potential for it. Be bold in the renewable energy transition. I know many people on this call will be involved in that and helping to drive it. But the interesting thing for me was around energy security. We are in a volatile geopolitical environment at the moment, and Costa Rica having its own energy security, its own source of energy that it controls, is actually a pretty good place to be in this day and age. And I would love it if Australia could get to that point too. Using environmental education and storytelling to connect individuals to nature. I saw that in a couple of the communities particularly where hunting had been quite prevalent. It was only through education, bringing the local community along, talking to them about the local wildlife and having that real sort of passion and pride that things were able to flip. And that kind of leads to the next point around you've got to bring the community with you. It's only if you've got sufficient economic opportunities, ways of earning a living that aren't hunting and poaching, that you can kind of help a community get to that point. It needs to be a just transition, and we talk about that a lot here too. And then I'd love the idea of just harnessing the spirit of pragmatism and pura vida. We are going to have to really strengthen our adaptation strategies in the face of climate impact, and that ability to just get on with things, kind of bring people together, rally the community around when something goes wrong, I think is a really important quality and something we'll have to cultivate more here. And some birds. That's a quetzal, which is very rare and quite elusive. And wherever I went, I recorded a little bit of bird song. Sometimes I listen to it, so take me back there. And there is a series of articles that I wrote with my friend about our travels there, and particularly going into a bit more detail sector by sector. So conservation, tourism, health, agriculture. So if you're interested, that link there will take you there. It's basically a series of articles on Substack.
Did you take the photos of the birds, Abby?
I took that one, but some of the really better quality ones were Candice, who I met at a yoga retreat there, and she very kindly shared her bird photos.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So happy to answer any questions. There's a lot more obviously there, but could talk about Costa Rica all night.
Yeah, that's fabulous, Abby. Thank you so much for sharing that. I might just jump in with a quick question to start with. You've been back, I think, a month or two now. When you sort of you think back to your trip, what sort of most surprised you, do you think, now that, when you look back on it?
I think, what I'm really noticing here is just being immersed in nature was such a treat and also became so normal there.
Yeah.
And I'm really noticing here, particularly with winter and the kind of shorter days and the cold weather, I'm just not feeling like I'm in nature as much as I was. And, every weekend I'm like, oh, should we just go up to the Blue Mountains and go for a walk? But then it's pouring with rain. And so I think just having that ability to be surrounded by the trees and the birds and the animals kind of all day, every day was a real privilege and something I'd like to cultivate here more, like in my day-to-day life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what about looking forward? Did you get a sense of where it's, because I know they've got different sort of chunks of time they've allocated to goals, haven't they? Is that right? And the sort of what's coming next for them, where the focus is?
Well, interesting. That decarbonisation plan was put together in 2018 under the previous government. And so this current government, being quite right-wing and populist, is not necessarily following it to the letter. There is an election next year, and I got the sense that if the government changes hands again, they'll kind of be a bit more back on track with that original plan. So transport, for example, was something that the previous government said, yep, we definitely want to invest in our public transport infrastructure, and that hasn't happened under the current administration. So I think there's some of those areas that are still a bit lagging. There is a plan there, and it's written, and it's kind of potentially could be followed, but right now it's a little bit on pause.
I was actually gonna I've thought about the tourism a little bit, just this kind of idea that you can one of the ways that you might help a community transition away from poaching is towards tourism. And we were lucky enough to be in Africa earlier this year, and there were some parallels there with Tanzania. They're paying, or I think they're aiming to plant, I can't remember how many, but a lot of trees. And yeah, they've really done a shift from poaching to people being employed in environmental tourism, I suppose. But I heard today in probably some some other people on the call might have heard as well about the protests in Barcelona about having too many tourists and feeling overrun by tourists and not, the impact on the cost of their housing and yeah, just not wanting tourists everywhere. I just wondered if you've thought about that at all and that kind of balance.
Yeah, they did talk about that. They talked about gentrification, and it was
Mm,
interesting. It wasn't just tourists. It was also a lot of expats, particularly Americans, who were working there and then were able to afford more expensive housing and were forcing the locals out. It definitely came up a lot, particularly in some of the more kind of touristy areas like Monteverde. There's this beautiful cloud forest, and basically the people who work in the hotels cannot afford to live in that village, so they kind of have to live in the next village down. And I think there definitely was that sense that people are coming here to see the nature and the wildlife, but if you're building more and more hotels, it's going to start encroaching on that land. And it
mm,
was a bit of a balance.
Mm.
Um, I think some of it is being done quite thoughtfully, like some of the building codes, for example, they can't build within 50 meters of the sea. And so all of the shorefront, basically around the whole country, you kind of look back, so you're swimming in the sea, you look back at the shore and it's trees. You can't
mm.
actually see
Right.
the houses, the Airbnbs, the hotels, which you know are there. So
Mm.
that's just quite a smart, subtle thing that they've done. Also, there aren't really tall buildings. It seemed to be that the building code was kind of limiting it to 2 or 3 stories in a lot of areas. So again, you don't see that kind of Gold Coast, really built up coastline.
Mm.
But at the same time, especially now, there were a lot of Americans scouting out land and wanting to move there. So there will
Funny
be
that.
more pressure. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't on mute. But still true fact. Abby, I noticed recently that Hawaii's in fact just put in a recent tourist tax for all tourists who come, and it's an environmental tax. It'll go straight to environmental things. And having recently been through there, I laughed to read all the comments on the Hawaii forums I was on that said, well, we're not going to go there anymore because it's so expensive. And it's like, you're going there for the nature, but you don't want to pay the tax and you don't want the impact. It did. People want that specialness, but are they willing to pay the true cost of what special costs?
Totally. Yeah. And actually, it was interesting, like the national parks there, they had one price for locals and one for tourists, which is totally, totally fair because they want the Costa Ricans to be able to enjoy, what is their heritage. But the tourists should be paying more to visit and enjoy it. And no one I met was worried about that in any way.
Did you get a sense, Abby, that the local people you spoke to, they're proud of what they're doing and what they've achieved? So,
Yeah, so proud. It was really incredible to see. Like they were so enthusiastic, like proud of well, just like their local birds and their local animals and just a real connection. So, there was one national park we went to, and the young female guide whose father had been a hunter. We saw these capuchin monkeys, the white-faced monkeys. She was like, "Oh, they're back. I haven't seen them the last month, but you can see now they've got their babies. So that's obviously where they were. They were off having their babies, and now they're back." So she knew those monkeys kind of, individually. There was another place we went where these scarlet macaws, this pair of scarlet macaws, kind of flew past every morning, and the guy who was serving us breakfast, he just kept stopping. We're like, "Oh, there they are!" And he must see those ones every single morning, but he was genuinely excited, and it was quite infectious, that kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Did you get a feeling that economically this was working for Costa Rica, though, that it was a viable model, for example, for other small South and Central American countries?
Well, it was interesting because it seemed like a lot of people were employed in tourism and in that kind of conservation area. But then looking at the stats, it was only 10% of GDP. And I think a lot of people are actually employed in, they've got big exports now around like medical equipment and technology because they've got a high level of education. So we've got a lot of global companies going there and kind of looking for skilled workers. So I think as a pure tourist, you sort of get one particular point of view, like everyone's here working in this beautiful sustainable tourism, but they have actually got other sectors going on as well. And I think maybe because of a high level of education, because of abolishing the army and investing that money, that kind of allowed them to diversify and become, they're not a wealthy country, but everyone has a pretty good standard of living.
And how much do you think does being self-sufficient in energy feed into all those things?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that just seemed like something they were taking for granted because they'd had it for so long, kind of 50 years. I think the big game changer was, well, it's actually health and education, because it was free healthcare, basically like the NHS used to be, I suppose, in the UK. Very sophisticated health prevention as well. So the friend I went with is a doctor, so she was really looking heavily into that. They had healthcare workers going out to every single house in the country, doing home visits once a year to kind of assess how the health was and give health education. So that, combined with the good free education, was just a bit of a game changer from a social point of view.
Amazing.
Yeah, we've got an interesting question here from Jeremy. He's asking, did you come across any examples of knowledge sharing with other countries in the region?
Yeah, there was one really cool thing that my friend looked into more, which was the Health Equity Network of the Americas. So that was particularly in the field of health equity. But Costa Rica was leading that for the region. So that included North America, Central America, South America. And they were all looking at how you kind of create that sense of health equity. I didn't see it so much in sustainability. They kind of seem quite self-contained in that area, although I know there's been quite a lot of publicity about them topping various sustainability indices and winning the Earthshot Prize and that kind of thing. So I assume there is kind of international sharing going on at that level too.
Thank you. If anyone else has questions, pop them in the chat. Feel free to do that.
Yeah, I mean, what about in terms of when you talked about the things that Australia could do? Do you think there's some things that, say within our group, or there's, picking a few of those to really try and, have an impact and take some of those learnings? Well,
Yeah. Look, I think probably the two things I would really pick on as opportunities are that sustainable tourism, like linking. I mean, Sue, I'd love to talk to you more about it, the national parks and the tourism side of things would be one. And then the other is really the environmental education, like actually bringing not just children, but adults as well, closer to nature and understanding our natural environment and really feeling that connection to it. Because it's sort of crazy. We have a very outdoor culture, right? Like we spend a lot of time outside, but I'm not sure how many people would know, what birds are flying overhead or what the local wildlife is, beyond a kind of superficial level.
That's quite interesting if you think about the sort of it's sometimes quite a different perspective, regional versus metro in Australia. Once you get out of the big cities, it can be a very different point of view.
That's true.
Yeah, a bit of an us and them sometimes, and maybe that connection to nature across the board could be something that is really positive for everyone.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting was actually in San Jose, the capital, which is quite crowded and, it's quite a lot of pollution and traffic. But they were all talking so passionately about nature, even though it kind of wasn't very present around them. So even though they were in the city, they still felt like, they would go out for day trips or go out on the weekends. And yeah, I think it was very much part of the national identity.
Interesting.
I was just looking there to see which countries border Costa Rica, and you got Nicaragua to the north and Panama to the south.
Yeah, and it was interesting that the river that we went up to get to the Bribri people was literally on the border of Costa Rica and Panama, and it was kind of shocking and impressive at the same time. Like one side of the river was Costa Rica, this beautiful dense primary forest, never been logged, and on the Panama side it was banana plantations. You just felt like, wow, it just you know, it would have been like that on both sides originally.
Mm. Right.
Oh, Tim, you're looking
Right.
up the climate impact tracker. What did you find there?
Mm.
Oh, he's on mute.
Tim's just added a link there.
Yeah, just clicking on that. I think that when you look at
Yeah.
the, yeah, you go.
Oh, I was just going to say that they're very close, but slightly inefficient. And I was kind of curious to understand what the remaining gaps are for Costa Rica, because they're obviously way more impressive than Australia. But yeah, kind of there's still some gaps, and it makes me think, crikey,
Yeah.
they've done a lot, and they're still
I
quite
think-
not there.
I think the biggest gap is transport. Like, I think, like I put on there, it's about 42% of the emissions now, because there's so much private transport and a lot of it is petrol fueled. So that's, you know, they've got everything electric in terms of houses and buildings and that kind of thing, renewable, but the transport is petrol, and lots of motorbikes and scooters, and they had a few Uber Green kind of EVs, but just really not that much EV penetration yet.
I would be interested to understand whether you think this is community activation or central policy and regulation. Which do you think is their reasons for success? Obviously, it's been a long journey, but
Yeah, I think there is this tradition of quite bold government decisions, going back, you know, really 75 years to abolishing the army. So they just, and even recently, like they just banned smoking. So you can't smoke anywhere in a public place, like a hotel, in the street, a restaurant. And the health professionals we spoke to just said, well, smoking's bad for you. It's like, yeah, I think we all know that, but you just decided to ban it, and they kind of brought people with them. So I think that plus a lot of the, particularly on the conservation side, a lot of individuals really passionately lobbying, and then government kind of encoding in law some of the things that they had achieved at the individual community level. So I think it really is that combination of top down and bottom up, and just the sort of national character as well. Yeah.
The health equity piece is really interesting. I probably have to go away and think about it, but I mean that's actually and the investment in health prevention, health promotion.
Yeah, totally. So if you look on that subsite link, there's a whole chapter or a couple of chapters on health that my friend wrote, and particularly some of the stats are incredible, like the mortality rate or sort of average life expectancy is on a par with Australia and better than the US, and the spending on health is an absolute fraction of any of those countries. So because they put a lot of money into prevention, which obviously is a lot more effective.
There's a question in the chat from Chris. Thanks, Chris. Interesting challenge of demand growth and how best to do this when a country's near to 100% renewables with climate change potentially affecting hydro. And did you get an understanding of what their plans are there?
Yeah, I think that's right. Hydro, you know, when there's less rainfall or different rainfall patterns, you know, that can be less reliable. They've got quite a diversified energy portfolio. So it is mostly hydro and geothermal, but they do have quite a lot of wind as well. And it was interesting flying over, you could actually almost see the border, because suddenly there were loads of wind farms. And driving through the country, so many kind of hills covered with wind turbines. But solar, I think, is the one area they really haven't explored, as I mentioned. So, and in a way, there hasn't been incentives for individual households to invest in solar, because, you know, they're already, it's nationalized and it's already kind of at that cheap price point. So you're not really going to get much personal payback from putting solar on your roof. But I think putting solar in at a more industrial level is probably how they're going to really amp up that supply.
Yes.
Has anybody got other questions they wanted to ask? There's maybe one more.
Oh, the bird life.
Yeah, one of
Yeah,
the agreements against wind is the impact on bird life.
they didn't talk about that, and they've got incredible bird life there, like so many birds. So I don't know. I'm not sure if we just didn't hear that or if that's an old argument that's kind of already been addressed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm just wondering whether they're trying to make up reasons not to have wind farms or actually if it's a
Could
real
be a
issue or
bit of
not.
that.
So with so many birds over there, it looks like it's not an issue.
Yeah, it's a good
My
check.
understanding is that there are like birds do die, but it's nothing like the pros way outweigh the cons, and it's in the same with sea life. With offshore wind, it's not, if it's positioned well, it doesn't have a big impact on bird or
I think the comparison is more catskill birds than wind farms do.
right. Yes, exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, good point.
Abby, a quick question about, I don't know if you noticed, but I was interested in that thing about parks and not being able to bring in bottles and quote unquote litter, because I'm on a project on that now. What did you see about litter and rubbish in the rest of the country? Focusing particularly on plastic.
Yeah, there was it varied a lot area to area. Like the waste collection was pretty inconsistent. So in San Jose, they didn't really have like the bins that we have. So people would just be putting bags of rubbish on the street. And so you would see quite a lot of rubbish. And then obviously that would sometimes leak out. A lot of regional areas, rubbish collection was pretty infrequent. People were actually burning rubbish, which I was quite shocked to see. And yeah, litter in the city, you saw litter on the street. In the country, not so much. Even in the national parks, even though people weren't allowed to bring sort of food in, there was litter, and a lot of it had been washed in. So where the national parks were on the coast, and people had then piled it up, and it would get collected, but it was washed in from the sea. So, and that was coming from other countries as well. Like we saw kind of soft drink bottles that weren't from Costa Rica that had probably come in from ships and that kind of thing. So there was still quite a lot of rubbish around in general.
Very good. Well, Abby, thank you so much. That's been really fantastic to hear about your trip, and encourage everyone to look at Abby's blog post, and we'll send the link is in the chat, and we'll send it in the notes following up as well. But really, really interesting, and I didn't know any of that, so it was really great. So thank you so much, and great
Pleasure.
to look at a country that's leading the way. So really appreciate it. We've just got a few more minutes now. And Tim, I hope you don't mind if I put you on the spot here, because I know you're in London at the moment and you're getting ready for the upcoming London Climate Action Week. I know that's coming up, and I think you sent a note around that there's like 45,000 attendees and 700 different events. So there's a lot going on. I just wondered, if you just wanted to say a few words for a couple of minutes about what it's like, and anything of interest.
Yeah, sure. So I'm informally part of an Australian delegation. There's about 20 of us here from across Australia. I've shared the program as it stood on Friday with both Carolyn and Stephen. So if you want to share that with this group, then that's fine. There are about 10% of the program events, so probably about 70 that are online. So if you're unable to be here physically, that might be something you could dial into. It's a very, very broad spread. For those familiar with the Sydney Climate Action Week event in March, which Stephen and I were involved in, it's a lot bigger. It feels like there's a lot more involvement across government, industry, community. It's going to be a bit of a orienteering challenge to be in 5 different places across the City of London over that week. But we're comparing a lot of notes with those from Australia. I'm pleasing to see the Australian Consulate are running a couple of events. The Superpower Institute are running a series of events. A number of Australian investors around sustainable finance are running events. So there is a reasonable representation from Australia, which is great to see. And there's a bit of reach out in advance of potentially a COP31 being secured for Adelaide in November, December 26. So that's quite exciting. Following Climate Action Week London, a few of us are heading down to Exeter to take part in the Global Tipping Points Conference. And this is really around some of the positive psychology around once you get to a certain point in adoption, the positive kind of flywheel effect takes effect. For those that are familiar with the work of Professor Tim Lenton, he keynoted at Climate Week New York last September. So I'll be sharing some write-ups, and maybe a future one of these calls I'll give a bit of a download. That's it, Stephen. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
that'd
Tim.
be great,
Yeah,
Tim.
really good. I think Liz Courtney, who's also part of our group, is over there as well. Don't know if you've caught up with her.
I spoke to Liz yesterday.
Oh, there you go. Great. Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that. Hope it all goes really well. Be very interested to hear about it all later on. So I think that's pretty well it, isn't it? I think we were also just going to let everyone know that very exciting news that we've been looking for a while at relaunching our website. Do you want to talk about that? Because you've driven that a lot, haven't you?
Yeah, we've got a new website which should go live in the next couple of days, just a little bit more contemporary. So we'll send the link around probably with the notes. I'm expecting a slight glitch with the email contact as we switch over, because we're just doing a few switches, not just a reskinning. So, but yeah, it's exciting. It looks a little bit, it probably reflects us a little bit better than our first one as we've grown up and evolved. And yeah, as always, maybe just give it a couple of days to settle down, and then please do feel free to share it with anyone who might be interested. And I think once we've got this sort of new site up and going, we'll also look at what else we might be able to do with the site, or with, perhaps growing our presence or sharing more. We've had so many amazing I think we said 55 sessions now. So that's more, probably over 100 fantastic speakers. So, and obviously contributions from all of you as well. So if if you've got ideas about how you think we can take the website or other things, forward, of course, we'd love to hear. And also love to welcome anybody's, further involvement if there's something you'd like to take on. So that's coming up.
Yeah, and I think the website, we also try to incorporate, we did a survey last year and we got a lot of feedback from people, and we try to incorporate a lot of that into the website as well.
Yeah.
Right.
So, do you want to talk about next month?
Yes, next month. So the next session is on Monday, July the 14th. And we're going to try and Tim's kindly linked us up with someone who's going to hopefully chat to us about Climate Active Week. And also we're probably going to get somebody to come and have a bit of a chat about COP31 as well, which the Australian government is looking to host next year. So that's quite significant, and I thought we'd talk a bit about that as well.
I might just jump in. I think that's I'm sure there's people who can comment more on the call than I can, but I think that's seen as one of the potential leverage points for the government to really push the ambition with climate and action on nature. If we are successful in getting COP31, and hopefully embarrass the government into doing a better job on some things that they've been kicking the can down the road on. Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, have a lovely
Great to
evening,
see everyone.
everyone.
Yeah.
So nice to see you all.
Yeah. Thanks again, Abby, and good to see everyone.
Thank you, Abby. It was terrific to
Yeah.
hear about Costa Rica.
Yeah. Thanks a
Lovely
lot.
to see you all. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Night.
Bye.